Are the Catholic faith and its virtues still relevant in our culture today? The new evangelization begins with us assessing the relevance of the Catholic faith in our own lives. We'll talk about that and trying to do that assessment tonight. So please stay with us. Thank you very much and welcome. I'm Father Mitch Pacwa, and this is EWTN Live, where we bring you guests from all over the world. Before we get to our guests, just want to mention that today the church celebrates the martyr, Saint Augustine Zhaorong. He and 119 companions, 87 of whom were Chinese Catholics, and 33 were missionaries from the West, a variety of different denominations, were all martyred. St. Augustine Zhaorong was a soldier who converted to Catholicism, but he died in 1815 after he was arrested and tortured. He refused to renounce his Catholic faith in the face of a severe decree against Catholicism from the Emperor Qin in 1813. The emperor was mostly about anti-Western influence in China. But for St. Augustine, it was very much an issue of his faith, his commitment to Christ, and that was more important even than foregoing torture and death. And it's important for us because as we hear a lot, there are many, many martyrdoms every year. Thousands of Christians are martyred around the world. And we need to pray for them, ask the intercession of the martyrs like St. Augustine Zhaorong, but also look to them as models of what it means to stand up for your faith and learn from them so that we do the same. Well, I always say how we have guests from around the world, and our guest tonight is a Catholic speaker and author. He's originally from Australia, but he's been living in the United States now for a good long time. He's been doing a lot of very important research into why Catholics engage in their faith or disengage, and tries to determine what it will take to establish vibrant Catholic communities in the 21st century. So please welcome the author of the book, Rediscover Catholicism. And he's also the founder and president of the Dynamic Catholic Institute, Mr. Matthew Kelly. Good to have you.
Thank you.
Welcome here to Alabama.
Thank you.
Now, you've moved from Australia how long ago?
I started living here in the States half the year in the mid-90s.
You were going to school?
Yeah, by 2000 I was here pretty much full-time.
Okay. And but you're originally from?
Sydney,
Australia. Beautiful city. And now you're sort of settling in a bit, and you're married. How many children do you have?
Three.
Yeah, and that's a good start.
It is a good start.
And God willing, the Lord will continue to bless you. But you're also doing this work with the Dynamic Catholic Institute. What led you to start that institute?
I started speaking in 93, and essentially between 93 and 2003 I traveled in 50 countries, saw a lot of the church in a lot of different countries, in a lot of different cultures, and started to see some larger themes emerging, and really started to ask the question, what is the difference between a highly engaged Catholic and a disengaged Catholic? Yeah. Because if we cannot answer that question, how can we drive engagement? It's impossible.
But see, it's interesting to me that you saw it in those terms. that a Catholic is engaged or disengaged. That's a very interesting way to see it. Are you an engineer that you think of gears or being engaged or disengaged?
No, but I make my living as a business consultant.
Okay.
And my consulting firm specializes in employee engagement. So how engaged is a workforce? Is a working population engaged, highly engaged, minimally engaged, and how can you increase engagement? And so it was seeing both of these things at the same time that brought together the question.
Yeah. That's very important. So what is it that you discovered as you examined, well, you were speaking, but again, learning about Catholicism around the world. What have you seen?
So the first phase of the research essentially did an 80-20 study and examined two things. So volunteerism within a parish and financial contribution within a parish. 80-20 principle essentially says that 80% of outcomes come from 20% of causes. Okay. And so in business, usually 80% of profits come from 20% of customers, or 80% of sales come from 20% of profits. So a bookstore has, the average bookstore has 100,000 different titles, but there's a few titles that just sell over and over and over and over again, like your books, just over and over and over and over and over again, that produce those profits.
I buy them all the time and just put them back.
You and your mom. But we asked the question, does the 80-20 principle apply to Catholic parish in the areas of volunteerism and financial contribution? We discovered no. 6.4% of American Catholics contribute 80% of the volunteer hours in the parish, and 6.8% of American Catholics contribute 80% of the finances in the parish.
So this is not 20/80, it's
93/7. Yeah.
So that's not really great.
For my staff tell me for about 2 weeks, once I got the research back, I was depressed. And then it occurred to me that it might actually be the best news we've got as a church in 50 years. Because when you look at what we are doing, you think about the Catholic Church, every single day we feed more people, we house more people, we clothe more people, we visit more imprisoned people, we take care of more sick people, we educate more people than any other institution on the planet Earth. If we're doing all of this with 7% of people engaged, imagine what we could do with 14%. Yes. I'm not talking about 100%, but I think at 14% we change the world. And so I think it actually is good news. It comes in the form of, I think, what is easy to look at and say that's a bit depressing.
So you can look at a glass 7% full and see it as 50% full.
I just see it as, I just think we're making a phenomenal contribution to society. And if 7% of people are doing that, imagine imagine if we just got 1% more like those people every year for 7 years. The other thing is, I think when we look at the 93% of disengaged Catholics, I think that's overwhelming. We look at that and say, well, where do we even start? But if you say to the average pastor, let's say there's 1,000 adults in a parish. Okay, now I know we count families, but let's say 1,000 adults for the sake of the exercise. 1% more is just 10 people. If there's 1,000 adults, 70 of those people are doing everything and paying for everything. And you talk to a pastor, you say, how many people are really involved in your parish? Pastors say, well, the same 50 people do everything. Well, the same 50 people pay for everything. So if there's 1,000 adults, 70 people are doing everything and paying for everything, all we need to do is get 10 more people, 1% more each year, 10 people in a parish. And when we put it in those terms, I think we step back from say, I can do that. That's possible. That's doable. It's not completely overwhelming. And so I think what the research does, it gives us a starting point. It gives us a map. It gives us a place to start.
Right, and I think that's a very important vision, because it can sound overwhelming to say, well, we can't do anything until we get the other 93%.
Exactly.
And it's not getting the other 93%, but working towards another, just doubling the number of people, if not trying to, again, we want everyone to hear the good news and to know about the salvation in Christ. But in terms of actively involved in the church, if we can get up to just twice what we have now, we'll be in great shape.
And we have to think about it in terms of our resources. We have limited time, we have limited energy, we have limited resources, we have limited talent, and the best way to reach the person in the 100th percentile is to work toward them 1% at a time. Because every percent you take on board, that 1% brings you the next 1%.
Yes. See, and I think that's a very important model, because I remember a lady I knew many years ago who said, well, I don't want to do anything in terms of an apostolate in the church until I have myself totally together. And I said, no, that's not going to happen that way. You get involved now and with what you've got, and having this sense of the same thing with the whole church. With what we've got, we get this group involved, and that'd be a big carryover.
Yeah, and I think people they're debilitated. They are overwhelmed, and if we look at the history of the church, I mean, God only looks for one thing on a resume, and that's availability. He doesn't always use the most talented people. He doesn't always use the best educated people. He doesn't always use the people in positions of power and authority.
That was the gospel today with the 12 apostles. They didn't meet any of those criteria, but that's how the church got started.
And they changed the world, literally.
Yep, exactly. And now here's the question. So we have this goal of growing to a point so that percent by percent, we can get up to at least doubling the number of people who are actively engaged. Then the question becomes, how do we do that? What are some of the things that we should do from our part? I mean, there's the role of God's grace that is beyond anything that we can do and will far exceed what we do. And yet there are some normal means that we can engage in. What would you suggest?
So the second phase of the research looked at what's the difference between the 7% and the 93%? What separates the 7%? How did they become highly engaged? And what is it in their daily life or their regular activity that keeps them engaged? And essentially what we came up with, what we call the 4 signs of a dynamic Catholic. Okay. The first sign is prayer. Okay, no surprise you ask Catholics, do you pray? They all say they pray. The 7% pray in a different way. Most people when they sit down to pray, they see what happens. And when you sit down to pray and you see what happens, usually nothing happens. And that's why people stop praying. When we did the research, when we did the interviews, we asked the 7%, and we were interviewing people that their pastor had identified as being part of the 7%. And one of the questions we would ask them is, okay, where do you pray? Oh, I pray in this big comfortable chair in my living room. When do you pray there? 7 o'clock every morning. Okay, when you sit down to pray, what do you do? And they would just look at us. They say, well, I pray. No. We said, when you sit down to pray, what happens when you sit down in that chair? What exactly happens? And they started to say things like, well, I take out my Magnificat and I do morning prayer. Or I read a chapter of the Bible. Or I pray the rosary. Or I've got this John Paul II devotional and I start with that. Or I've got this Fulton Sheen devotional, I start with that. The 7%, when they sit down to pray, they don't see what happens. They actually have a plan. And so they have a routine of prayer, and they have what we call a routine within the routine. So they generally pray at the same place in the same time in the same way every day. And when they sit down to pray, they've got a routine. And so that's the first sign. The second sign is study. They're continuous learners. They're constantly learning new things about the faith. They're watching Catholic television, listening to Catholic radio, reading Catholic books, listening to Catholic CDs, going on pilgrimages, going to retreats. These are the people who are continuous learners in the area of the faith. The third sign is generosity. They're off the charts generous. I mean, just off the charts. Time, talent, treasure, yes, but the generosity is much more creative than that as well. They're very generous in those areas, but the stories we heard in this area were just phenomenal. I sat down with one set of researchers, and they were interviewing this woman, and she said straight out of the gate, you got the wrong person, you need my friend. We'll say the woman's name was Mary, and we'll say her friend was Susan. So we said to Mary, why should we interview Susan? She says, she's my best friend. We work together as nurses at the same hospital. We go to the same parish. She's who you should be interviewing. We say, well, tell us about Susan. She says, she's the most generous person I know. I said, well, tell us about that. Mary says, well, I just got done with a battle with cancer and I was off sick. Hospital let me have a month off with pay, and then after that I had to have time off without pay. While I was off, Susan organized for the other nurses to work in my place. Every day someone would come in on their day off to work in my place so I could continue to get paid. We said to Mary, we said, how long were you off work? 4.5 years. For 4.5 years, her best friend had organized a roster of other nurses to come in and work in her place so she could continue to get paid while she battled with cancer. And so that's the sort of creative generosity we saw.
Sure.
And the fourth sign is evangelization. Sharing the good news with other people, sharing the joy. You know, they've experienced the joy that God brought to their lives, and they want other people to experience that joy.
Yeah. You know, it's I find it interesting because I'm sure some of the viewers just say, well, you know, they have this routine of prayer and they do this same routine every day. Doesn't that get boring? And one of my own responses would be, well, don't you have a routine for eating meals? Does that get boring? And presumably not. You know, and it's the same thing with prayer. This is a great place because the prayer also indicates not just techniques, but a vibrant relationship with Jesus.
That's right.
That's what's key.
And when we reduce it to something transactional, then yes, it could become boring. But while it's a vibrant relationship, never.
Yeah. And I've certainly come across many pastors as I travel around who have told me that they opposed having a Eucharistic adoration chapel in their parish. But some intrepid, creative, generous people, usually ladies, kept getting on his case. He did it. And he said, I can't believe I was so stupid and hold him back. Because as people pray, they don't get all turned in on themselves. They become so generous. This is one of the constant effects that they saw.
And the data's clear now. I mean, 10 years ago, we were sort of having the argument. 20 years ago, we were definitely having the argument with people about Eucharistic adoration. But today, the data's clear. I mean, you see vocations, you see more vibrant parishes, you just see it works in people's lives. And you see it helps people's lives to work better. And I mean, I talked about that in Rediscover Catholicism. As far as I'm concerned, that debate is over now.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be an ideologue to be opposed to it. It's because it is something that this is where people have quiet to meet Jesus.
And there's so little of that in our society.
Yeah, exactly. Now, so it would sound then, based on this research, you would recommend that people become more prayerful.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The research showed that even among the 7%, 84% of those people said that nobody had ever taught them how to develop this routine of prayer. They sort of developed it by trial and error. You know, I think we read the Gospels, the disciples only ever made one collective request of Jesus: teach us to pray.
Right.
And I think it's the cry of every age. I think people need to be taught how to pray. You know, we have rich sacrament life in the church, but people need to be taught how to develop the daily routine of prayer. They're not just going to pick it up by osmosis. Right. They're not going to just pick it up, you know, culturally. They actually have to be taught how to pray. Right. And I think we've got some real work to do there.
Right. But also, in terms of the generosity and the ongoing study and the evangelization, all of those would be the same. That this is what I imagine you would suggest, that we ought to be giving people ideas on how to do all four of these aspects: prayer, generosity, study, and evangelization.
Yeah, and I would say, let's take a 4-year approach in a parish. Let's say this is a year of prayer. Let's say every ministry in a parish this year is going to focus on teaching people how to pray. By the end of this year, everyone in the parish is going to be taught how to pray. There's going to be nobody in the parish who has an excuse and say, oh, nobody ever taught me how to pray. First year, prayer. Second year, study. You know, we live in a time when people have more questions about Catholicism than ever before in history. Yes. We also live in a time where there's less people who have answers.
Right.
You know, we have an obligation to learn more about our faith so that we can answer those questions. The third and the fourth sign flow from the first and the second sign. generosity and evangelization flow from prayer and study. You don't get the first two, you're not going to have the second two. I think the generosity one's big. I talk a lot about money in the book because it came up a lot in the research, and the 7% talked a lot about money. And in one of the interviews, I stopped the interview. I wasn't doing the interview, but I stopped the interview and I said to the guy, let's stop talking about money. Let's talk about other aspects of generosity. And he said, no. I said, why not? He said, money's the most important thing when it comes to this. I said, why? He said, because money has a way of getting a hold of our hearts, okay? And then we're not available to God. He said to me, and there's a reason Jesus talked about money more than anything else in the Gospels. And at that moment, I'd never thought of that. And I'm sort of searching my mind, okay, is that true? Did Jesus talk about money more than anything else in the Gospels? And I went back and I started to think about it and I started to research it. And the truth is, the reality is that as Catholics, we're not that generous. We come off as generous because there's lots of us. And in the book, I outline the generosity of evangelical Christians, mainstream Protestant Christians in America, Catholics in America, agnostics in America, and atheists in America. And in that lineup, we are only, as Catholics, we are only marginally more generous than atheists and agnostics. Yeah. We don't go anywhere near mainstream Protestants. We don't get anywhere near evangelical Christians. They're 10 times more generous financially than we are as Catholics. And so I think we've got an issue around money. I think we've got an issue around generosity. If Catholics tithed, we'd change the world, but we don't understand it. And I think part of the reason is I'm not sure we have a really fully developed theology of money.
How would you mean?
I don't think we talk enough about money. I think we're accused of talking about money all the time, but I don't actually think we talk enough about money. I think we need to teach people how to earn money, how to save money, how to invest money, how to spend money, and how to give money. The problem is we spend a lot of time just talking about giving money, and we don't teach people how to earn money or how to give money or how to save money or how to spend money, and I'd love to hear a homily on, okay, how do you make a really good spending choice? Next time you're thinking of buying something, how do you make a really good choice about that? I think if we start speaking to people about all of their money, I think we will become a much more generous church.
Yeah, we have only one program on Saturday mornings about money. But you're probably right that, I know a lot of us clergy are intimidated from speaking about it and from asking, because you hear people, oh, that's all I ever do is talk about money. When it's not the case. And it's just the same thing that you oftentimes hear. People will say, oh, those priests, all they do is talk about hell. And you hardly ever hear sermons on hell. Matter of fact, I've been doing more of it. I figured, in the old days, there are sermons on hell, and people, paid attention. But now you don't hear them, so what do? They go see horror movies, and if they pay $10, $12, we used to do it for free. This is crazy. So this is something that, that with the money part, we just don't do that much of, and it's something that we definitely need to see, that integrated sense of this is one of the ways you have your gifts. How do you use it?
Absolutely.
Now, how do you recommend that we start inculcating this? Because I know one of the things you yourself experienced a good deal of your own process of conversion in your adolescence when you were a teenager. But today we see that, a number of our teenagers go to catechism until they're confirmed, and then they stop. And so they're not doing that part of learning that you were talking about, that the ongoing education about the faith. And so what do you suggest?
That's obviously a big a moment of passion for me, because we've spent the last 5 years developing a confirmation program. And one of the things I discovered in developing that was, if a Catholic is baptized as a child, there's really no moment in the catechetical development of a Catholic where we ask that person to make a choice for Christ and to make a choice for the church. at every moment in the catechetical development of a Catholic, if they're baptized as a child, we assume that they've made a choice for Christ and they've made a choice for the church, and they haven't. So we're operating on a false assumption, and I believe that is really limiting us, you know. And so when we develop the confirmation
with one
program,
exception.
Yep.
The one exception is on Holy Saturday and the Easter Sunday at the Vigil, and at Easter Sunday, instead of the creed, we priests ask in the Roman Rite the baptism questions, and one of it is to make sure that we don't just do that by rote, but your point is very important. Each year, when there's a bigger group of people there, ask me, do you believe in God the Father Almighty? Do you believe in Jesus Christ, who is born of the Virgin, and so on? You go through the basic, and they're supposed to respond, I do. But that's the one time a year that we do that. And we need to call people to a more serious response to that.
No question.
Matter of fact, one of the things I like to challenge people, do they know the date of their baptism and celebrate it? And do they know the date of their first Holy Communion when they invited Jesus in their heart? Do you remember that date? And do you recall it and celebrate it? That would be another way to pose this challenge. Now, in your catechism class for confirmation, how many years does that cover? Is that just 1 year, or how do you do that?
So the confirmation programs, it's built around 72 short films. And the films can be broken up because confirmation classes are different all across the country.
Sure.
Some people have 6 weeks, some people have 3 years. So the way we designed the program was so that it could be broken up and used in a variety of ways in a variety of dioceses, depending on the way they do confirmation. But essentially, I think the essence of it is we have to have a conversation. I think all of evangelization is a conversation, and we have to engage our young people in a conversation about the genius of Catholicism.
Do you have a book that goes with these videos?
Yeah, so there's a workbook, there's a leader guide, there's the videos, there's an app for the smartphone, there's an online version for parishes. Every parish in America can get it for free. You know, that's
Is
one
that
thing.
right?
Yeah, our donors paid for it. Every
the
parish in
pastor,
America.
start listening to this. He's offering it for free. He's not handling anything here. Let me give where they can go, because it's they can contact this at the Dynamic Catholic Institute, correct? And you can either go to dynamiccatholic.com or call them 859-980-7900. So 859-980-7900. Pastors, secretaries of the churches, start writing that number down, because the price is very good. But it's to get across this need.
Yeah, and we just felt like there's no point building the best confirmation program in the world if half of parishes can't afford it.
Right.
You know, and so we went to our donors and we said, we want to give this to every parish. In fact, every person can get one for free. You know, if you've got a child and you just want your child to go through it, just call up and get a copy.
How big is your phone bank when they hear that everybody can get one
Go
free?
online. Go online.
Yeah, that'd be good. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll come back. We want to get some of your questions and your comments, so please stay with us. Thank you, and welcome back. First of all, I want to mention that we have a lot of folks here from different parts of the country. Big group from Owensboro, Kentucky, wonderful town, and Texas and a few other places. And we'd love to have you come and join us too. So if you can, please contact our pilgrimage department. You can call them at 205-271-2966 or go to the website EWTN.com, and they'll give you all kinds of information about the scheduling of masses, programs you can be in the audience for, tours of the studios, directions up to Hansville to go see the convent and the Shrine of the Blessed Sacrament. And of course, they'll give you information about places you can stay, whether you come as an individual, a group, or a family. They're happy to help you, plus good places to eat. We gotta get some fried green tomatoes down here and good barbecue. We got hamburger heaven. So it's all good stuff. You ready for some questions?
Sure.
All right, let's get it. We'll start off with Jim. Hello, Jim.
Hi.
Hi, where are you from? Where are you from?
Good, Mr. Kelly.
Yeah?
Okay. With all the people who broke away from the Catholic Church and got away from the Lord, don't believe in the Lord anymore, how does he propose to reintroduce them to the church?
All right. So how do you reintroduce people to the church if they don't even know much about the Lord anymore at all?
I think that's a tough one. People leave for a reason, and so they generally have questions. I'm a big fan of John Paul II. He was one of my great heroes, and one of the things he taught me was through a book he wrote, Crossing the Threshold of Hope.
Yes.
And the origins of the book was that he was meant to do an interview. He couldn't do the interview. It was a television interview. He couldn't do the interview. He was sick. And so the interviewer sent him a letter saying, sorry, you couldn't do the interview. Here are the questions I was going to ask you. And John Paul II, in his spare time, I don't know what spare time he had, but in his spare time, he wrote answers. And I think in that, what he taught us was people deserve answers to their questions.
Yes.
And not just catechism answers. Catechism answers are good, but people deserve and people want deeply personal answers to their deeply personal questions.
Like my dad used to say, you got to scratch them where they itch.
That's exactly right. That's the theological way of saying it.
So that's one of the things. But that also means we have to be able to know what the catechism says and the scriptures say.
We either have to have the answers or know where to get the answers.
And then be able to respond authentically to that person.
Exactly.
Again, scratch where they itch. Let's take another question. Father, where are you from?
Hello, Father. I'm from the Atlanta, Georgia area.
Oh, good to have
with
you.
the
You're
SALT
welcome.
community. Thank you.
Just down the road.
Yes, I drove here actually.
Yes, see?
Father and Mr. Kelly, I'm concerned about the level of joy in our parishes. It's a fruit of the Holy Spirit. And this present Pope seems to be the most joyful Pope or most joyful man I've ever seen. He says, you Catholics, you can't be sad. My first word to you is joy. So I was wondering, how can we approach evangelization from the point of view of joy? How can we make our liturgies, our parishes, and our pastors more joyful so it doesn't seem like a funeral mass on Sunday? There's something joyfully there. We have good news, something wonderful to celebrate. Where does joy play into all of this?
I think it's a great question. I think if you're walking down the street and a complete stranger smiles at you, you naturally smile back. But someone has to start that, And so I think sometimes we just got to smile at each other. We've got to become a people of welcome, Most churches, every Sunday there's a fire drill, Have you noticed everyone sits on the edge of the pews? That's because there's going to be a fire drill, and they want to be able to get out of there as quick as possible. Mm-hmm. That's not a welcoming position. If you walk into a church and there's someone sitting on the end of every single pew, and that's the first time you're in that church, you don't actually feel welcome. And so I think welcome and joy go together. And when we become a people of joy, we'll also become a people of welcome.
One pastor that I used to help out at his parish in Nashville, Father Alan Cunningham, great pastor. He put a sign over the last two pews It said these 2 pews are reserved for every individual who has need to fear the presence of God. They were never full. Everybody sat up front. Let's take another question from our studio audience. Deacon, where are you from?
Good evening, Father. From the Archdiocese of Newark, New Jersey.
Great, good to have you here. Welcome.
Good to be here. Thank you. So my question is, how would you market this, besides the obvious, free, to the reluctant pastor so that we can increase the activities within our parish and bring more people not only into the pews, but get them actively involved and engaged in living their faith? Pope Francis recently said that our faith is to be lived out. It's not a 45-minute or an hour appointment once a week on a Sunday. So what strategy would you recommend to the reluctant pastor?
Yeah, I think the first thing is we got to be mindful that pastors are under incredible pressure.
Yes.
They're being pulled in 100 different directions, and every idea seems like a good idea in isolation. But when you put that idea into the mix of everything that's already going on and limited resources, then pressure comes to bear on ideas, I think if we're talking about the confirmation program, for 50 years, 100 years, there's been no video content for confirmation. 1 million kids get confirmed every year. 85% of those kids now stop practicing their faith within 7 years of being confirmed. We got to do something different. We got to try something different. Do anything, try anything, but we got to do something different when it comes to confirmation. And I think that's probably how I'd pitch it to a pastor, and just get them to try it. When it comes to other things, we talked about the 4 signs of a dynamic Catholic. I think we've got to make space. I don't think you can go up to your pastor in the sacristy 5 minutes before Mass is going to start and say, Pastor, hey, I've got a great idea. I think you've got to invite him over to your house, have a barbecue, have a beer, and have some time, have some space for these conversations to develop.
Okay, let's take another call. Hello, Dan.
Yes, Father.
Hi, where are you from?
Yes, I'm from Connecticut.
Great, and your question?
Yes, my question is for Matthew Kelly. Is I'm very interested in what he's had to say about re-evangelizing and trying to get people to come back. But one of the things that bothers me at the most is, and perhaps this is a new approach, there's absolutely no personal interaction between our clergy and our people. It's a very indifferent, sort of a cold type of church. And certainly, I know in my own case, if I don't make it a point to let the priest know what my first name is, it will never, never happen. As a former teacher, I can tell you the first thing you do with kids, learn their names for rapport. And I would like to see this more with our bishops, taking more of sort of a personal interest in our parishes, and certainly with our priests. And with that, I'll hang up and I'll listen to your answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.
Well, I think it's a good question, but again, to Dan, I'd say our priests are under incredible pressure. Yeah, as a teacher, the first thing we're taught as teachers is know every kid's name, but there's 20 kids in the class. There's maybe 30 kids in the class. You've got parishes in California with 10,000 families, and so I think we've got to temper our expectations, the expectations we have of our pastors. I think we've got to ask ourselves, what's most important? What do we most need from our pastors? And I think we've got to temper our expectations around what we most need from them. At the same time, I think, we could become a more personal church, but that responsibility falls on all of us, not just a bishop, not just a priest. 60% of the congregation's in the car before the end of the closing hymn, so there's no community gathering after Mass. I would say to Dan, I would say to others, I would say to myself, we all have to own that. If we want to have richer community, and I believe we all yearn for community, we got to own our part of that.
Yeah, and I would speak for especially the parish priests. That I don't have the same pressures they do because they are running sometimes $200-300, sometimes $1 million or $2 million, $5 million operation, depending on if they're schools or not, and they are really, really pulled. The pressure on pastors is tremendous. They're exhausted. Finding time for them to get away and do any kind of relaxation where they can just recuperate is very difficult. And I think we have to be sensitive to that. That's part of the difficulty that comes with the shortage of clergy.
No question. And I think back to one of the earlier questions, that steals our joy. When we're under that much pressure, when we're that overwhelmed, that steals our joy. And so if we want our priests to be joyful, we've got to give them some white space. We've got to give them some time off. We really have to temper our expectations.
And, for instance, when it comes to prayer, if you see the pastor making a holy hour with the other people, let him be. Don't say, oh, I just saw that the light bulbs are out. Now, I leave the priest alone. Let him pray. He needs it like everybody else does.
No question.
Now, I said that once before on TV, and one viewer was very upset. You shouldn't tell them. I said, look, if somebody's dying, of course, interrupt him, but let him pray so that he can have the same relationship that is the start before you do the studies and the generosity and the evangelization. He needs his own time with Jesus.
It's like when you get on the plane, they got all those safety announcements, they say in the event that the cabin loses pressure, oxygen masks will come down. And if you're traveling with a small infant or a child, put your own on first.
Right.
It's completely counterintuitive, but it's what a parent has to do. It's what a priest has to do.
Right.
If we're really going to serve the people we're called to serve.
Right. So that's these, and when you tell the priest about a great new program like this, confirmation program, start off, said, Father, I would like to head up this new program. Here's what it is. Would it be okay with you if I did this? Instead of saying, here's one more thing that you got to do. That'll help. Sir, where are you from?
Daphne, Alabama, Christ the King Parish.
There you go. Good to have you here. Welcome.
I've been hearing about this new thing called the New Evangelization, and I wonder how that meshes with the dynamic Catholic movement that you're talking about.
So I think what we're trying to do at Dynamic Catholic is demonstrate the relevance and the genius of Catholicism to people in the modern world. There is a lot of talk about the new evangelization. Unfortunately, there is a lot of talk about the new evangelization. And I think if you polled 1 million Catholics and said, what's the new evangelization? You got 1 million different answers, which means what? We got nothing. So I think we've really got to focus in on how do we repropose the gospel to people whose hearts have become hardened to the gospel, which essentially is what the new evangelization is, in the words of the last 4 popes. And reproposing the gospel to people who think they already know the gospel is very, very difficult. And the only way to do that is to really meet them where they are and lead them to where God is calling them to be.
Sure. All right, let's take another question. You have Stan. Hello, Stan.
How you doing, Father?
Hi, where are you from?
Michigan.
Great. What part?
Grand Rapids area.
Okay, it's not too far from my brother's place, over by South Haven. So what's your question?
So my question was for Mr. Kelly. I'm just curious, of the 7% who you say support 80% of the parishes, how many of those, or did you get into the details of, how many of those were later life converts versus cradle Catholics? And leads me to my next question, maybe more of a comment question, was I find that the later life converts have the kind of curiosity of their faith, which I find lacking, even myself sometimes, but with a lot of cradle Catholics. And just something to kind of comment on, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah, so I don't have those details just to recall from memory. But if you shoot me an email, if you visit dynamiccatholic.com and send me an email, I'll be happy to send you some more data on that. There definitely is a moment in a young person's life. There's a lot of data that shows if we don't get people before about the age of 15, there's this window between 15 and 40 where very little goes on. And then you start to win people back after 40. Problem is, by then they've made a lot of mistakes. By then they're coming back with a lot of baggage, and they come to church with all of this baggage, and they say to the church, fix it all. And they come to the church with, I think, monumental expectations. Yeah. And it really does put a great weight on the church, because they need then real personal attention. Yes. They very often need one-on-one counseling. They need one-on-one spiritual direction. they need very, very personal attention. So I think that puts a lot of pressure on the systems, there's just not enough priests, there's just not enough spiritual directors, there's just not enough people who have really good Catholic formation who are able to turn around and really deal with those scenarios.
Right. And that's one of the things, and it's not just a Catholic problem. This is a cultural problem, that we have this cultural expectation that between 15 and 40 is the time you're supposed to have the time of your life. That this is when you get to have all the fun, because after that, life is really downhill, which is dumber than a box of rocks. I've already gone through the 20s, the teens, 20s, and 30s. Those are fine. But 40s are way better, but you need to prepare for it. 50s are very good. I'll give you a report on the 60s in 5 years, but until they're done. But it's, the idea that you get all the fun when instead you make yourself a fool in that period, instead of learning the tasks that prepare you to live the 40s, 50s, 60s, and God willing beyond, well. That's something that's key.
No question. And I think the connection there is between the philosophies that are essentially ruling our age.
Yes.
When we ask, what is life about? Our culture says fun,
right.
Or pleasure, or a combination of both, or stuff, or achievement. And
right.
so, when we ask the question, how is the best way to live? In fact, the real problem is we're not even asking the question anymore. I think the great minds of every time have asked the question, and not only asked the question, but been obsessed with the question, how is the best way to live? Our culture doesn't even ask the question. We've decided that the best way to live is how anybody wants to live. And the best way to live for you is different from the best way to live for me, and you leave me alone and I'll leave you alone. And in the process, it's all falling apart.
Right. Because that leads to necessarily a system that says my self-interest is obviously the most important thing around.
Well, then it's just a world of isms.
Exactly.
Individualism, hedonism, minimalism, materialism.
Dumb-ism.
Again, the theological perspective.
We have a question from our studio audience. Ma'am, where are you from?
I'm from Owensboro, Kentucky.
Good to have you here. You've been here before. It's good to have you back.
Yes. I have a question for Matthew Kelly. When I was confirmed, I was 8 years old. Anymore, we have teenagers, and they can decide whether they can be confirmed or not be confirmed. What age do you recommend?
Well, that's a raging debate, I think. There is some people pushing for what would be called the restored order, so to confirm children before First Communion. Most dioceses, the majority of dioceses in the U.S. confirm kids between the age of 12 and 15. I think if we're going to have restored order, which I would not be opposed to, we got to have a plan for the teen years. Mm-hmm. If we're losing 85% of them within 7 years of confirmation, and they're being confirmed on average at the age of 13 or 14, mm-hmm. we don't want to be losing 85% of them within 7 years of them being 7 years old. Mm-hmm. So if we want to go to a younger age of confirmation, fine, but we better have a rock solid plan in place for what catechetical development and spiritual development looks like during those teen years. Otherwise, we're not going to get anybody.
In the Maronite Rite, we bestow chrismation at baptism. So they receive baptism and chrismation, which is confirmation in Latin Rite. And you're right, you have to do other things in terms of their involvement in Mass, after Mass, that they provide, for instance, meals and things, and catechism for them at their age group, other activities, because they need to be part of the community, which they are. And so that's very important. As well as contact through college. That's also very important. We have another caller. Hello, Janice.
Yes. Hello, Father Pacwa.
Hi, where are you from?
From Omaha, Nebraska.
Oh, thank you for calling. What's your question?
Well, I have a comment for Matthew Kelly. I am so pleased to meet him over your program. I want to thank him for his book, Rediscovering Your Catholicism. His book was the focus of our parish's Lenten season this year. Our pastor bought books for everyone in the parish, passed them out, told us what to read each week, and then we had a discussion where we followed either a deacon or a priest each week to review what we had read. It was a wonderful Lenten season, an incredibly different one than I have ever had, and I want to thank him for that.
Well, thank you very much for calling with that. See?
It's my mom.
She doesn't talk funny like you do.
She's been practicing all week.
No, that's great. As a matter of fact, we have copies of your book for everybody in our audience. You are the first author to do that. Every time I come up with a new book, I'm handling the thing, I'm selling it for a good price, but you are giving it away. That's very kind of you, and it's also going to be for sale at EWTNreligiouscatalog.com. We have another question from our studio audience. Ma'am, where are you from?
I'm from Nigeria.
Okay, now you win the long distance award. Good to have you here. And what's your question?
I have a question. You talked a lot about money, and you said, the Catholics don't give as much as the evangelical Christians or the Protestants. Is it because they base it on tithing, giving the 10% of first fruits? And should we adopt that way of doing things?
It's a great question. I started speaking and writing when I was 19. And so I've been involved in full-time ministry for more than 20 years. And I invited a priest to come to a retreat I was giving about 10 years ago. Okay. And for the last talk at the retreat, I said, okay, you give the last talk, anything you want, it's all yours. And he talked about tithing, and he challenged everybody in that room to tithe. And what he said to them, he said was, I want you to go home from this weekend. I want you to get out last year's tax return. I want you to calculate what percentage of your income did you give to church and charity last year. He said, and then what I want you to do is I want you to give 1% more this year. And I want you to give 1% more again the next year and 1% more the year after that. And so I was 30 years old at the time, roughly. I've been involved in full-time ministry for a decade. Nobody had ever challenged me to tithe, and I think that's pretty common in Catholic circles. I went home, I got my tax return out, and I'd given 3%. And the year before, and I said, okay, I can do this. I'll do 4%. And I ended up, I think, doing 5 or something like that. And I kept increasing it each year. My wife and I, we sit down every year. We say, okay, how many more percent can we do? And we increase our tithe every year. I had breakfast last month with Rick Warren.
I was just going to bring him up.
Rick and his wife do a reverse tithe. They give 90% of their income and they live off 10% of their income. And my wife and I, we talked about that. And what I would say is that we have a real responsibility to give. We have a spiritual need to give. Go home, get your tax return out, and calculate what percentage you gave last year. Give 1% more this year, Can you jump in and give 10%? Yeah, but you don't have to. Just little by little, God leads us along the path, and it's powerful, and tithing is life-changing.
And, there's a certain school of thought that wants the government to take care of all these problems.
How's that working out?
You want to start with the VA, or where do you want to start? Welfare, what? And it turns out that the people who promote that approach are the least generous to the needy and the poor of all. And this is not my reflection. This is based on surveys of their tax returns among politicians, and very wealthy people have huge amounts of money. But they'd rather do it through the state, where there's incredible amount of waste, versus getting it to charity in the church, where it actually gets more of it gets to the people. We had a question last week. How much of the money for the Indian and African American mission gets done? 100%. Goes to the people. So these are the things that we also should consider. Unfortunately, what we need to consider is that the time is up. I want to mention again, the Dynamic Catholic Institute, 859-980-7900 is their phone number, or go to dynamiccatholic.com. Matthew, thank you so much for being with us.
Very welcome.
It's a delight. Thank you for the generosity of giving these books to everybody in our audience. And may the Lord bless you as well. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
And, you know, you as an audience have been tremendously generous to us. You have made this possible so that we've grown over the last 30-some years from 200,000 homes to over 240 million homes, and all the radio and everything else. But we still need you to please keep us in between your gas bill, your electric bill, and your cable bill, so that we can pay our bills, especially during the summertime, where the bill collectors still show up. Thank you, and God bless.